Nationalism has been depicted through history as a sure way to guarantee political support, be it in elections, trading policies, migration issues, and even more. It is oftentimes followed by words such as national security and the public's interest. But to what extent does the public's opinion, or at least the opinion of certain organized groups, influences the foreign policy of a country? Nationalism is, by definition, the identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. As we enter the 21st century, we were able to see a definite rise of this issue, or at least a more accurate portrayal of it on the media. On the recent history of the Western world, nationalism hasn't been a topic seen favorably due to the part the nationalistic rhetoric has played on the destruction brought about by World War I and World War II. The effects pan Germanism had on the world lasted for decades, and recently, as we enter the 21st century, we were able to see the rise of new and old nationalistic groups.
Nationalism has always been, to some extent, an integral part of the construction of the state as a political unity, but in its more extreme form, can affect how a country is seen by the rest of the world and, therefore, affects the relationship this country has with other countries and organizations. Some examples of how the nationalistic rhetoric has been gaining traction within the world is the significant rise of extreme right-wing political parties who have nationalism at the center of their main policies. The historian Eric Hobsbawm reflected that the sense of belonging aroused by nationalism could be exploited by rulers for political purposes. It goes without saying that examples of the use of nationalism for this political purpose are plentiful in the history. Nazism is one of them, an Aryan nation with expansionist goals. In Germany, we have the Alternative for Germany, or Alternative for Deutschland, AFG, which is a nationalistic anti-immigration far-right group who has gained a lot of traction since founded on 2013 and who focuses on fighting a so-called invasion of foreigners, especially those of Islamic states. In France, Marine Le Pen came as a close second in the 2022 elections against Macron. Le Pen has, throughout her political career, criticized the French immigration policies and spoke in favor of the seizing of all legal immigration in France.
In Europe, the refugee crisis has been one of the main issues of the 21st century. Due to Europe being close to Africa and the Middle East, many of the victims of humanitarian crisis cross the land and seas in its direction. As a result, many conservative groups and individuals experience this heightened feeling of nationalism and use it as a means to justify the expulsion of that which they consider foreign to their way of life. In the political sphere, this can be reflected on the rise of conservative immigration policies, clearly stating the pressure the public opinion can have on the foreign policy of a country.
In the United States, we have the presidential election of 2016, in which the president elected, Donald Trump, came to power through a campaign based on making America great again, which was supported by many ultra-nationalist white supremacist groups and individuals. His policies were majorly focused on immigration, especially with the promise of the construction of a wall along the US-Mexico border. As a president, he enforced a zero-tolerance immigration policy regarding families crossing the border illegally, which resulted in the separation of children from their parents in their detention centers, as well as the so-called Muslim ban, an executive order which lowered the number of Middle Eastern refugees admitted to the U.S. and briefly suspended the entry of legal immigrants of those countries. The culmination of the ultra-nationalistic Trump campaign and the influence this rhetoric had on certain groups can be seen on the 2021 United States Capitol attack.
After Trump's defeat in 2010 elections, his supporters marched towards the Capitol complex in Washington, D.C., attacking the Capitol building in which the formalization of the president-elect Joe Biden was being held. The responsible ones for this attack were not only common citizens supporting Donald Trump, but also members of far-right nationalist militias such as the Proud Boys, the Tree Persons, and the Oath Keepers. In Brazil, with the approaching presidential elections, we see, again, a rising nationalist sentiment across South America. Bolsonaro, elected in 2018, rising up power through a similar campaign is Trump, in the idea of a strong United States with its interests ranking above everything else. As we apparently exit a global pandemic and as many conflicts to be dealt with arise on the next few years, we'll be able to further observe how much this social individualism and political extremism has affected the way national states around the world relate with one another.
In recent years, we observe a new way of populist nationalism arising throughout these nations. And that's why it's of utmost importance we're able to identify these aspects and groups that have the power to influence the national and foreign policy of those countries. One of the main consequences of this type of exaggerated sense of national pride is the superiority complex it brings in relation to one's own culture and the rightful place this country might have on the international political system. This can bring about great problems such as racism, xenophobia, and prejudice against immigrants, for example. This way, it's fundamental for a debate on these issues to be a constant presence when talking about global politics. Such extremism can directly impact on the international policies of a country and propel the image and relations this country has in a foreign environment. Besides, there's an issue of basic human rights that can be violated when nationalism assumes its more violent form, going directly against global efforts and treaties that remain as a basis for many international organizations. As we know, the internal workings of a country can affect the diplomatic ties between national states. That's why nationalism remains, especially at this day and age, as a main topic of discussion when it comes to global politics.